Hello everybody, Calamity here. Hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving if you celebrate it. Today's video is going to be about the new event limited exclusive weapon, the Calamity of Eshu. I didn't know I was making my debut into this game as a sword, but first, let's talk about how you actually get the weapon. First of all, you have to participate in the Iktomi Spirit Seeking Scrolls. This is the flagship event for the current patch. And if you don't see this page, that means you're not ranked 20. You have to at least be ranked 20, so if you're under that, just get to work on doing main story progression for yourself and get that adventure EXP. That being said, once you actually participate in the event and do like all the mini games, the combat, etc., head on over to the Spirit Seeking reward button over here on the bottom left, right next to Chitali, and you will see the Calamity of Eshu. And then the refinement material is also here as well. These little shuttle of Odaras that you will get as you participate in the event. And at the time of recording, I cannot get these materials just quite yet because, well, I'm waiting for the event to release more parts. But I have gotten the weapon itself. So let's take a look at what it does. The Calamity of Eshu is the event weapon's name, once again. And it does have a substat of attack percentage, which is a little disappointing, but that's just how it be. And then the base attack is 565 at level 90. Keep in mind, I have leveled this sword all the way up to the max level. Wasn't too bad, and you can get plenty of the materials just wandering around Natlan. Now, the weapons effect is called Diffusing Boundary. So while your characters are protected by a shield, damage dealt by normal and charge attacks is increased by 20%. And then the normal and charge attack crit rate is increased by another 8%. Well, increased by 8%, excuse me. So the refinement rank is only at 1. Keep that in mind. So once this is at refinement 5, once the event is completely out, this will actually be 40% increased normal and charge attack damage, and then this will be a 16% increase into your crit rate from the weapon's effect. This is actually pretty good stuff. Now that being said, here are a couple character suggestions I have for you. And one of them being one of the characters on the very screen. That's right, Chi-Chi. Decent option for this weapon, primarily because it's a good stat stick for her. Because if we look at her talents, her healing, right, is scaled off of her attack. So a sword that gives you a high base attack as well as additional attack percentage is going to give her a nice boost in her healing capabilities. And you're going to have to find, energy recharge elsewhere. In my opinion, you probably want to go for an energy recharge stance instead. The same can be also said for Jean as well. So this is another character that I can recommend this weapon to. Again, simply because this weapon does give them a bunch of attack, and that is how they scale their healing. So if we look at skill attributes again, on the burst, that's where her healing is. You can see attack being yet another stat used for scaling for her healing. So something you want to keep in mind, this is a decent stat stick for them. Again, this isn't going to be best in slot. If you pulled like a 5-star weapon or even some of the 4-star weapons in the game, they will pair similarly or even better than the event weapon. It's nothing crazy, but it is something solid and something good for new players to get, especially when you're lacking 4-star weapons for all your characters. Right, next up is Kaching, our first DPS character that I recommend this sword for. And that is because Kaching is a character that uses all parts of her kit. That does include charge attack, skill, and burst. And that's also the downside to this weapon, is that, well, it will be making her charge attacks pretty buffed, and they'll have a good crit rate. She still does damage with her skill and her burst, and that won't be affected at all by this weapon's effect. Not to mention, she is also a character that wants some crit rate, crit damage, and having that as a substat helps out when building them. So getting attack percentage again is nice, but it does make it a little bit harder to get other much more needed stats. Still something to consider. Another character you could consider giving this to is Alhaitham, although he does have better options. And well, I don't really have the character, so that's why we're on the details page for the character archive. But most of his damage does come from his skill. However, his damage rotation does include using a mixture of normal and charge attacks. He's also been called like the Dendro Kaching, so they have very similar playstyles where you want to use their entire kit to do damage, and Alhaitham is just that. So again, it will buff his normal and charge attacks, but we do want to buff his entire kit. So again, good decent option if you don't have a lot of 4 stars or 5 stars to give. Another character that I can recommend, and maybe some of you guys forgot, is the Kamisato Ayato character released way back in Inazuma. His damage is primarily centered around dealing normal attacks, so the weapon is perfect for him, gives him a nice crit rate boost, nice damage boost. This is definitely for, you know, havers of Ayato. Maybe you didn't build him before, maybe you don't have his signature weapon. You could definitely consider giving this weapon to him. I think this is actually one of his best free-to-play options in my opinion. Last but not least, my character recommendations is going to be Chlorine, simply because when you activate her skill, Hunter's Vigil, it turns, you know, she starts shooting those guns, and those are considered normal attack damage, which again, the sword buffs. So good sword for her as well, a decent free-to-play option. Once again, if you don't have anything for her, if you don't have her signature weapon, stuff like that, definitely something to consider. All right, gonna do something a little bit different than my previous event weapon videos, and I'm gonna actually go through the list of every single sword character in Genshin, and I'll give my 2 cents whether or not the weapon is good for them or not. So on this list that we're using on Game 8, we have the Traveler, the Pyro version of the Traveler, which has not been released at the time of recording this video, and we don't know when they'll be coming out. So we don't know how well this sword could be a potentially good weapon for Traveler, if their Pyro element makes them sort of a DPS, you know, character centered around normal attacks or charge attacks. So it could be a potential weapon, but we don't know for sure yet, unless you look at leaks, which I don't. Next up is Albedo. He's a defense scaling character, so this weapon doesn't really help him at all, and he does off-field damage, so not really doing on-field attacks. Not really good for him at all. Alhaitham, I already said my 2 cents, so yeah, decent option. Ayaka does use normal and charge attacks in her rotation, but remember, the big part of her damage is her burst, and that is not buffed at all by the sword, so I guess it would be like a semi-decent option for her if you have nothing else, but there is a free-to-play sword you can craft in Fontaine that is considered her best free-to-play option instead. Ayato, probably the best holder for this weapon, at least for now. Chiori is another defense scaling character, and again, she does a lot of her damage. She does do some like normal and charge attacks, but a lot of her damage comes from her little like puppet doll things. So not really the best option there. Chlorine, decent free-to-play option. Freyna scales off HP percentage, so the attack percentage does nothing for her, and we want some crit rate and crit damage on her instead. And she also does damage through her skill, so this is not going to be really good for her. Jean, it helps with her healing, and a little bit of her damage, right? But she doesn't really do normal or charge attacks. Kazuha wants energy recharge or elemental mastery in his stats because his burst is really good. He doesn't really do on-field damage unless you have him at C6, which I doubt is a lot of you, so not really the best option there. Keqing, good for her normal and charge attacks, but again, her skill and burst will not be getting any benefits from this weapon other than the attack percentage, which is meh. Nilo, she wants elemental mastery to get those big bloom damage, and unfortunately this weapon just doesn't give her any of that. It will improve, I guess, her personal damage a bit because of the normal attacks and charge attack stuff, but yeah, no. Chi-Chi, same thing as Jean. It's going to help her out a little bit when it comes to her healing because of how she scales it. Don't forget that Chi-Chi can be a decent DPS character, at least early on, especially if you want to build a physical DPS. Chi-Chi, she can actually take advantage of the normal and charge attack buff, so not a bad option there. Now we have all of Traveler's current elements that are in the game, and the only one that it could be decent for is maybe like Geo, I guess, because if you're using the best version of Traveler, which is Dendro arguably, you just want elemental mastery and honestly more just energy recharge more than anything for them, and this weapon doesn't provide any of that. So yeah, not really the best option there. It could be okay for Electro, I guess, and then Hydro we pretend doesn't exist. Shilinen doesn't really need it. She's a defense scaling support character, so yeah, she does do some attacks, but she's not really a DPS. Bennett, not really an on-field DPS character, and don't forget, only the base damage of the sword is what's taken into account when using his elemental burst buff. So the extra attack percentage isn't really doing him much. Kay is an off-field DPS with his burst, so not really an on-field character. Kirara and Layla are both shielders that scale off HP. We want lots and lots of HP, not so much attack percentage for their shields. I guess it'll improve their personal damage, but unless you're using Kirara as like some weird spread DPS thing, it's not that good. Lynette is a swirl DPS support, or sorry, excuse me, a swirl support like Sucrose. And, well, you know, again, not really doing much on-field damage there. Shinobu is a HP scaling healer, so the sword doesn't really do anything for it. And Jingcho is yet another off-field DPS character who does damage mainly through his burst. And that is basically every single sword character in this game. Quickly, you know, yes or no if the weapon's good for them or not. So hopefully that was helpful to somebody. And with that being said, that is going to be it for this video. If you feel like I still missed a character, or it actually could be pretty good on a character and I'm totally missing the point, feel free to correct me in the comments down below. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching. I will see you all in the next video. If you have any other questions, don't forget to ask them in the comments. I will try my best to answer you. See you in the next video.